Did you, what have you been up to?
Today I did a really cool thing. I went to the Science Museum. My good friend, the good doctor Sarah Oberg Stradal, is in town for Freeze Art Fair to try to sell manuscripts to millionaires,
Mm.
as she does, as is her wont. But she used to work at the Science Museum, and so we went to go check out the medical galleries today and look at her old work, which was cool. So, like, saw a cool skeleton of someone who had leprosy. Saw some very cool old like medicine jars. One thing that's cool that I enjoyed that wasn't medieval is they've got like a fake old timey chemist like drugstore
Mm.
that's got like all the Victorian jars and things
Hmm.
and spectacles and stuff like that. And that was really fun. Um, and yeah, lots of really cool things to look at. Old medieval urine jars and stuff like that. So it was really fun. Like, okay, so that was a big thing for diagnosis up
Yeah.
until we figured out about germs more generally. Is we just, well, I mean, I guess it's still a big thing for diagnosis. I take it back. It's a big
Yeah.
thing for diagnosis. You gotta be looking at people's pee. I don't know, man. And so they got a bunch of like medieval ones of those, and that's cool. And then had some had went to kind of like one of the food fairs outside and ate a spicy paneer wrap. So that's a nice day. That's a good day. It's horrifying because it's like in the 70s Fahrenheit slash 20s here in London, which it should not be in October. But
Hmm.
if the world's dying, then I may as well eat a paneer wrap outside, girl. What's up? That's what's up. So,
Yeah.
how you going?
Good. Finally feels nice around here
Yeah.
during, yeah, finally. Um, may have, I think the humidity may finally be breaking. Like the general humidity usually breaks during winter, and it's not
Okay.
that humid. It's still humid. Like it would be humid to most people, but it's not
But not for
normal humid for
Floridians.
here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So just hanging out. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was. Went to. Went to this like outdoor like museum slash zoo thing
Oh,
with
cool.
my kid on Sunday, and that was fun. Got to see a dingo because they have some
Hey,
guest dingoes in, and
they're
my
cute, right?
kid, yeah.
Mm.
At first, the kid was like, "Oh, I'm scared," and I was like, "Well, sweetheart, they're just kind of big dogs.
Yeah.
They look a little bit more like." Dogs,
Mm.
like dog wolves than dogs do,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she
Yeah. Yeah.
and she's like, "Oh, why don't they just look like dogs?" And I was like, "That's just Australia, baby. I don't know
I
what
don't
to tell you.
know. 'Cause
They got their own evolution down there. That doesn't apply to the rest of us."
they got their own thing going on. Although I was surprised the first time I saw a dingo by how dog-like they are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
I was expecting them to be more wolf-like, and I was all like, "Oh, that's a friend. He surely
Yeah,
won't steal my baby."
no.
You know, things of that nature.
I heard that was a real story, like
It
the
is.
dingo ate my baby
No, that's
thing.
no, it's real.
I thought that was like a tabloid thing, like, "Oh, my dingo ate my like,
Yeah, okay, yeah, because it was part of the Satanic Panic in Australia. Like, so, because basically this woman was, out in the outback doing like I don't know, like stuff with a
Yeah.
bunch of other people. A dingo seriously stole her child,
Oh
and then she
no.
was like, "A dingo stole my baby." Like I can't even say it without laughing. It's not funny. Um, and
It's it's so
but
funny. That's the problem.
yeah, that's the trouble. And so a dingo straight stole her baby, and instead of like, being like, "Oh God, that's awful," everyone was like, "Are you sure you weren't doing satanic magic with your baby and you didn't kill it in a satanic ritual?" Because it was the '80s, so things were really normal, or
Mm-hmm.
like the early '90s or whenever. And
Mm-hmm.
then later on, a woman who was considered to be not a potential Satanist had a dingo try to steal her baby, and then everyone went, "Oh." and then like everyone kind of had to apologize to the other woman. But yeah, I mean, like they're mostly scavengers, but you know, large dogs will eat a meal where there's a meal. They don't care. They didn't care. They didn't care about your baby.
Man, that's horrifying. Yeah, I don't know. Like I thought, so like there's this thing in America where like if you get on the app next door, you'll see like people, and if you're not from America, you don't know what Nextdoor is. It's an app where people can post in their neighborhood, ostensibly to be like, hey, I've got like, you know, a treadmill. Would somebody like it? So I don't have to like try and hawk it online or whatever. And but mostly it's for like people to be like, I saw some young ruffians walking down the street with you know, with pocket knives, and it's like, you know, like a kid coming home from school with their backpack or whatever. You're like, okay, man, cool. But like you always see people and they'll be like, I saw a coyote. And like every single time it's like, it's just a dog. Like it's a stray dog, but it's just a dog. Like, you know, like coyotes will attack people and pets. Dogs really won't do that unless they're like rabid or, you know, like it's really bad, you know, but like, so like I always thought it was kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, a coyote, and you're like, okay, whatever. And then like I found out like I think it was a couple years ago, I guess. I was like, I saw something or I read something, and it was like the true story of this, and I was like, oh, holy fuck, that is awful. I didn't see it compared to the satanic panic thing, but they were like, yeah, it's totally real. This woman lost her kid. And I was like, fuck me, that is terrible. At the same time, though,
unfortunately,
a dingo ate my baby is just really fucking funny.
Unfortunately,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's a sad story, but also two things can be true. That it's sad that happened, and also it's just fundamentally funny to say a dingo ate my baby. So you know,
nar.
Yeah,
nar. I can't. I got nothing.
Nah.
It's such a delightful accent to me. I know people make fun of it, and with good reason, but it's just delightful. I just like accents. I think I've talked about this plenty. Yeah. All right, cool. You want to talk about some fake British guys?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello, and welcome back to We're Not So Different, a podcast about how we've always been idiots. My name is Luke Waters, and I am an amateurish historian. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Eleanor Yanniga, who is anything but. Today we are talking a bit more about King Arthur and his knights, possibly a round table, you know, maybe a sword, who's to say? But yeah, before we get there, we got a question from one of our patrons, a guy from PA, who says, this is mostly for Eleanor, which, I mean, most of these are. Is there a book or something out there that compares medieval Spain and colonized Mexico / any Spanish colonized territory? I feel like pushing a certain level of controllable / small c conservative thought is just a thing that empires tend to do. It's just that a lot of early modern / late medieval brain seems to be prevalent in rural Mexico, at least among my family there.
Yeah, okay, so one of the things here is that a good way to look into this is to just kind of check in with our good friends, the Habsburgs. Right, who did indeed colonize Mexico in the early modern period. So my go-to recommendation for this at the moment is my PhD dad's book, The Habsburgs, The Rise and Fall of a World Power. That's Martin Rady, Rady. He's got a good chapter in there about the colonization of Mexico by the Habsburgs, and that is really useful. And also, you know, he's responsible for me as an academic out in the world. So if you like my stuff, you'll like Martin's stuff, which is one of the reasons why I would recommend it. A book that I have read that I think is useful and kind of hits on this is called Festival Culture in the World of the Spanish Habsburgs. This is from Routledge, so it is more academic. So try to get it from a library because Routledge books can be pretty expensive. But what it does is kind of like talk about, triumphalisms in, court, both with the Habsburgs and in the Americas. Like ideas about ceremonial kingship, festivals and hagiography, things like this. So I think that that's quite useful. A good book on this in general is called The Last Emperor of Mexico. That's by Edward Shawcross, and I do think that that is a good one. So basically it's like, it does what it says on the tin. You might also enjoy from a more ethnographic perspective. There's a book called Wandering Peoples, Colonialism, Ethnic Spaces, and Ecological Frontiers in Northwestern Mexico. That's by Cynthia Ratting. And that's a little bit later. So if what you're kind of looking at more is the kind of like specific thing about colonialism and the overlap with ethnic people, that is good. An older book that I immediately thought of, I think it's from the 80s, but I really liked it when I read it in uni, is called Man, Gods in the Mexican Highlands, Indian Power and Colonial Society, 1520 to 1800. And so it kind of talks more about religious things. So I think that you'll do well with that. And that takes you all the way up to like Zapata.
Yeah.
So that is quite cool. And then one more thing that I would recommend just because I thought it was cool is Food Conquest and the Colonization of 16th Century Spanish America. That's another 80s one by Supper. Sorry, Super, I think. Super, John Super. So that's a bunch of books, obviously. But I think that when you're looking for those things, it's good to kind of have a mix. And so, like a good place to start, I would say, is with Habsburg, since they're the ones who did it. And from there, you can kind of have a look at what those reading lists are. So that is a lot of books that I've just kind of thrown at you. I realize that. But I think if you're going to start somewhere, just read that chapter in Martin's book and then go like scavenge his bibliography. It fucking works,
Yeah. I think, I think the big thing here, or I guess there, is the hacienda system. They imported it. They imported, feudalism. The only place really that feudalism was imported was to the Spanish Americas, and they put it down there, and that displaced a lot of other things, and so that's kind of why you get a lot of that there, because feudalism or whatever, manorialism was dying in Europe, but at the same time
they're like, but this time how about here?
At the same time they were like, hey, what if people in Mexico and Guatemala and Colombia, what if they had it? That would be great. Everybody would love that. And
they're
so,
like,
and
they're like, and it's even better because we could just straight up enslave them. They don't even have to be like serfs. Yeah. We don't even have to pretend they're people.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
You just have to put something over their head, and then
that's it.
And then beat them, and and it lasted longer than basically anywhere else in the world. I mean, there's like Russia, but because they didn't free the serfs until the late 1800s. And in Central South America, they just
when they kicked the Habsburgs out,
it was just there until like the it was there until the 1800s, because once you got the Habsburgs out, you had all of these people who had become like the wealthy, kind of bourgeois class there, who were staying there permanently, and weren't Spanish, and they were like, okay, cool, yeah, they're gone, but we're just going to enforce the system on everyone else, and it didn't go away in Mexico until like I think the 1800s, like the late 1800s.
Yeah, and they're like, the problem isn't the system, the problem is that I am not controlling it. Typical rich people shit. Normal. But I think that Guy, I think that you are pretty bang on here. So all I can really do is kind of start you off on the journey. And obviously I'm a dilettante in this area. I've only read a couple of books on it, and most of what I know is just kind of like from being a historical materialist more generally. But yeah, I think it's a good thing to explore. And if you're interested, like, yeah, give it a go. Let us know how you get on. Suggest more after that if you get on with it, I'd say.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Guy for PA, thank you for the question. And as always, if you want to ask us questions like this that we will have to answer here on the show, then please do subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/WNSDpod. $5 a month. You guys know the drill. Join. It's fun. We are going to do an episode. We have an episode on Friday coming out about giants. Big tall people, not
the Nephilim,
not the football team. Yeah. So yeah, it's So check it out, and it's great, and you'll have a lot of fun. But anyway, on to the main part of the show. So last week we started our long-awaited series on King Arthur and the Arthurian legends with a brief introduction before talking about how this collection of tall tales and cuck fanfic was built into a cohesive canon over about 800 years during the Middle Ages. It was a lot of fun, and I especially like it when Eleanor confirms my preconceived notions on the show, because I really like being right. Sure, it shows the enduring human spirit of creating and adapting art according to our own headcanons and changing circumstances, and it definitely proves that we're not so different. But again, I just really like being right about stuff. But today we are moving beyond the medieval canon and into the early modern era, which saw a decided decline in Arthurian interest for a few centuries until it was revived in the 19th century and eventually retook its place as a foundational piece of art and culture in the English-speaking world as we know it today. We, of course, don't have the same flourishing of new stories or adaptations as they did in the Middle Ages, but it does serve as the basis for many modern stories and characters, especially in the fantasy and sci-fi genres. So we'll talk about that a little to catch you up on the full history of the Arthurian legend, but then we're going to go back to the medieval canon to introduce the recurring cast of characters, settings, plot devices before turning to the actual stories themselves next time. Everyone remembers Arthur and Merlin, but what about the questing beasts and Tom Thumb, a tertiary character who has a series of American convenience stores named after him, oddly enough. And yeah, we all know about Excalibur. Who doesn't love a magical sword distributed by some watery tart? But do you know the entirely Arthurian trope of the Dolorous Stroke employed against the fallen Fisher King? Well, you might not, and I certainly didn't before I did this research, but still, others don't. So we will be talking about these and other such things today as we do more intro for the Arthurian legends. Eleanor, Arthurian legends were some of the most popular stories circulating through Western Europe during the Middle Ages. Why did they experience a huge drop-off in popularity and interest at the outset of the early modern period?
There's a few reasons for this. One is the kind of as you hit the early modern period and as you get into, for example, the Enlightenment and all of this bullshit, you have a disinterest that creeps in stories about Arthur because everyone is like,
actually, he wasn't a real guy. Oh, that's not a real guy. I think you'll find.
And okay. Yes, was I one of those guys on the last show? Yes, I was. Yes, I was here.
No, you weren't. I asked you the question. I set you up for it. And it's just, so people can know. There's a big difference between being like, we're just going to say this at the outset so we can all, kind of level set expectations. And being the person who jumps in. Two people are like, I really love the Sword and the Stone. Like, oh, yeah, me too. And swinging in there on a vine, being like, Arthur's not real.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, man.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it's what that is kind of in aid of is the hater patrol, right?
Yeah.
Because I would argue that, sure, some people would sometimes be like, oh yeah, and then here's where King Arthur lands in, in the history of Britain or whatever. But, they're also and Brutus came to Britain from, Troy. Do they actually believe these things? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? And the way that the Arthurian legends change over time, and Arthur's kind of like build new characters and things like that. I don't really think that they think they are talking about necessarily historical characters, but they like to build a canon, right?
Yeah.
But early modern people, because of the Enlightenment, are like, well, if he isn't real, then why do you even... it's just like some nerd-ass nerd shit. It's just like, oh, well, someone said he was real, but he's not real. And so you don't need to pay attention to any of this. So this, like, centuries-old form of literature, it therefore sucks because he wasn't actually real. And it's like, well, maybe you just kind of misunderstood the fucking brief. You know, but like that's what the early modern period is all about, is the rise of that shit, right? So yeah.
So they have a people just kind of don't they just the interest drops off. They turn to other things, but you do have this kind of like almost like I guess a bigotry, a form of bigotry, or looking down your nose at oh, that's a Welsh thing,
well, so this is one of the big things that happens in general is another thing that starts happening in the early modern period is this rise of nationalization, and this is one of the things that is like my bread and butter. I'm really interested in kind of like late medieval nascent ideas of nationality. And when people kind of start describing themselves as distinct groups and things like this. And, part of what kind of happens, as we talked about last time with the Arthur myths, is especially later on, people are like, he's English, he's fucking English. This is an English guy, right? You shut up, he's English. And so what that does is it kind of turns off Welsh people, and it also turns off French people. When they are also kind of like, oh yeah, we're also making our own national myths. We're also trying to put together the building blocks of what our culture means.
They're like, I've got Roland. I don't need your shit.
I don't need.
Leave me alone.
Boo. So it's like they're like, I don't want this thing. Get this English shit out of here, right?
Yeah.
So you have an uptick in disinterest from like the groups who were participating in it before. Where like other people just kind of slough away, like why would you be particularly interested in bigging up national myths from a group of people that you don't particularly like, and indeed that you often see yourself in conflict with? Right.
And so then it gets less popular, but there's still there just aren't that many stories around, and so you get like other characters from King Arthur coming to the forefront, and one of them is like Tom Thumb, who just had like a ton of stuff, like a ton of like small books written about him, but nothing else about it. Like they were like, I don't give a shit about Arthur, but Tom Thumb, this guy's great. They
absolutely love Tom Thumb for whatever reason, and I like Tom Thumb because he's so early modern as the thing. It's like he kind of props up for the first time in the 16th century, and he gets all over the place. So for example, like he is in the discovery of witchcraft, which was like, which was written by Reginald Scott to be all like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all of these witches that like we have out here in England or whatever. And Tom Thumb, as an actual historical personage, is brought out to say, oh yeah, like here's magic in the world, here's these magical things. And then like there are all these stories which we'll get into later about Tom Thumb, and that kind of comes to the forefront. And indeed, in this period, one of the things that you also have is just kind of a rise in fairy tales more generally. So, like in the Germanic speaking lands, you have like, the Brothers Grimm doing they thing. You have more quote unquote folk tales. So like the niches that you used to find being filled with Arthuriana start just being more filled with whatever like local legends are, fairy stories in those ways. And also as a result, stuff like Tom Thumb, this begins to be seen as stories that use tell to children. And so there's this kind of disprivileging, I think, of Arthurian myth because you have kind of like silly stories like Tom Thumb that are a part of it as well. But so basically what fills in the gap there is much more folk literature because you have a larger, in the modern period, kind of bifurcation, I would say, of how literature works. So whereas like Arthuriana used to very much be something that ordinary people would also participate in, and they'd know the stories, and like, yeah, we have these famous people's versions of what's going on. People would also like make up their own stories about it. But then you get into the early modern period and stuff just becomes a lot more highfalutin. And it's like, oh no, you need real authors to make real literature, and that's different from folk tales. And so, you know, things kind of diverge. So, you know, there's a lot to be said about how our own relationship to literature changes in the modern period, and that contributes, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get, you know, I like it. You just get, they're like, yeah, we gotta get some new characters in here. I don't really like this guy, but you know, then you just kind of throw Tom Thumb everywhere. They're just like, yeah, he's cool. I like him. He's nice. Yeah. But that was kind of, the status quo for, you know, a couple centuries. And then, in the 19th century, mid 1800s, the character gets revived in a big way by one Lord Alfred Tennyson and predominantly his work, Idylls of the King.
Yeah, so this is very much the thing in the 19th century, right? This real interest in medieval stuff comes back. And, you know, you see this, for example, with, like, the Raphaelite school of painting. So, you know, you get all those pretty paintings, like, of the Lady of Shalott. And, you know, like, all of these, like, if you like, Google a, like, medieval knight, like, what's gonna come up is actually 19th century paintings, you know, that, like, some dude made. And the reason why in the 19th century people are very, very particularly interested in medieval stuff is that they kind of are like, we must return with a V to the medieval period as a reaction to industrialization.
Yeah.
And modernization more generally. So they're like, everything is filthy now, dark satanic mills, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone is kind of like removed because of the process of enclosure and the process of moving people from off of the land into industrial society. We are no longer connected to our medieval roots. Let's become more like medieval people who are good and clean and pure and Christian. And so this also has a knock-on effect within literature in a big way. And you get your man Tennyson there. So he wrote Idylls of the King. And so basically he has a couple of things. He wrote like his own Mort to Arthur. And then he builds on this in the Idylls of the King, and he writes kind of 12 poems because that's his thing, isn't it? And it like basically he writes about like Arthur first meeting and falling in love with Guinevere, the quest for the Grail, Guinevere cheating on him with Lancelot, and then like, you know, the downfall of Arthur. So like he basically makes his own poetic cycle. And Tennyson, famously a very good poet indeed. And it's really, it's very, very nice, incredibly romantic. All like, oh, chivalry, blah, 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 valor, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, he's also kind of like updating it and making like, making King Arthur kind of like the ideal Victorian man. So it's like, you know, a lot of wanking off about kingship.
Yeah.
You know, like within a kind of colonial context as well. But it's very clever, is what I would say about it. So yeah, quite fun. And I do recommend people could check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean this, you know, for lack of a better term, just completely resurrects interest in Arthur. There are, you know, famous stories that people begin writing them. And of course, I think probably the most famous one that came in the wake of this was Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, which is one of the first time travel stories too, you know. And so it's just kind of, you know, it inspires this stuff, and it starts to bleed into the early 20th century, where we get less adaptations, meaning we get less, like reworking of the story, and more like inspiration than anything. It starts to come into other works, and I mean, it can't be understated that the rise in medievalism and romanticism that was happening at the time, and the discussed with industrialization, was happening when J.R.R. Tolkien was a boy, and this informs all of his stuff, especially because, I mean, Lord of the Rings is basically a melding of, King Arthur, medievalism, anti-industrialization, and obviously biblical stuff. And and I mean, I know you know a lot about, or I'm sorry, I know we talked about it a little before, but Tolkien did a lot of stuff with Arthuriana, not just incorporating it into Lord of the Rings.
Oh God, yeah, because he was a medieval literature scholar, and he were doing his thing at Oxford, and so he was a big Beowulf guy, but also a big Arthuriana guy, and a lot of what he basically set the stage for a lot of kind of modern Arthuriana textual criticism, a lot of kind of talking about how we should read the characters, how this works kind of like within a medieval mindset. And I mean, what this is kind of part of is, he grows up as a boy with the return stuff. And then in a kind of very 20th century way is and now let's analyze it, right? Because 20th century people are a lot less likely to be we must return, because then we're in kind of the full scale scientific revolution that sort of happens in the 20th century, and then it becomes quite popular to be actually medieval people are disgusting, and to make up a bunch of weird shit about them. 20th century people are a lot more wanting to hate on the Middle Ages, but textual criticism and literary stuff, that's still fine. Right, and especially because Lord of the Rings is quite rightly celebrated, people are willing to kind of take that on board. And having said that, in the 20th century, we do have this big interest still in kind of stories about kings and queens and everything. That's Disney's bread and butter, right? And granted, the Sword in the Stone, that's the only kind of expressly Arthuriana Disney thing, but fairy tales and fairy stories are still built out of the same culture and tradition. And brave knights going to find a damsel in distress, yada yada yada, that is all stuff that also comes out of these original Arthurian myths in the first place. So analyzing that is privileged more at that point, I would say.
And then, you move into the modern era, and, as we said, we don't get a ton of adaptations to the stuff anymore. Obviously, there's the Green Knight. The So Terrible, It's Kind of Fun King Arthur movie with Keira Knightley and Clive Owen from the early 2000s. Oh man, I forgot it last week. There's I think it was 1998, NBC aired a TV miniseries called Merlin with Sam Neill playing Merlin.
Oh, I remember that shit. Yes.
Fucking loved that when it came out. My mom recorded it off of TV onto a VHS because that's how old I am. And it's I loved that shit when I was younger. And that's kind of the King Arthur you get now. It is a lot more into inspiration and being a foundational thing, because you get Arthur was one of the big things that Joseph Campbell did when he was coming up with his monomyth idea, which of course is the basis for Star Wars and basically every fantasy and most sci-fi novels done since the 1950s are based on this monomyth, which is a lot of it based on, I think it's the Arthur the cycle of him, he lives, they go find the Holy Grail, and then he's taken away to Avalon or whatever at his death. Yeah, and so that's kind of where that's a lot more of where you get Arthur nowadays, at least from what I can tell. What do you?
Yeah, like the hero's journey, yada yada
Yeah.
yada. There's a call to adventure. There's usually supernatural aid. Then like you have challenges. Usually your mentor dies. Then you are transformed. You atone and you return to do more better, right? And that is kind of like the way that we like our Arthuriana anymore. Although you do get like your Merlins, you do get things like that where people are like, oh, let's that's very popular now. The new takes on specific characters, I would say. I think that it's not a problem to apply this concept to a lot of Arthuriana.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that sometimes we can over egg the concept of the hero's journey or monomyth because it's easy. You can just like pick and choose. You can be like, the Odyssey, and it's like, yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But then there are some that are a little more like, in there. And but I think that a lot of the time, a lot of Arthuriana does kind of fall within this. Although Tristan and Isolde maybe not so much, but stuff like that. So, yeah. I do think that it is also a way that people write now.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like a built-in way of doing it if that's what you want to do. So when we do get new versions, they tend to kind of cling to that because they want to show that they understand the tradition, I suppose. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
not at all. It's just interesting that it's replete in so many levels of history, but we just most people, like the general population nowadays, like if you're like, I'm gonna do a story with King Arthur, they'd be like, okay, cool, like it's not one of the things that's gonna like totally pull people nowadays, but when you do it well, people will come to it and will enjoy it, and then they discover much more of Arthuriana, and there you go. Yeah, so that's kind of tracking the history of Arthurian legend from then to now. Like when you look at it nowadays, like the general way that the Arthurian canon is built, would you say it's still mostly based on the Geoffrey of Monmouth, or is it more of the more to Arthur, or is it even later and it's more based on like the Idols of the King stuff?
I think that a lot of it kind of comes from, I would say, like the Grail cycles.
Okay.
Anymore, and I think that the Idols of the King and everything, I think that really cleaves very specifically to these ideas. Although what Tennyson really did is, and quite annoyingly, if you go and you want to like research these things, like one of the things that you'll see come up over and over again, people will be like, code of chivalry, code of chivalry, code of chivalry. And I'm like, there's no such fucking thing as a code of chivalry. That's like a Victorian invention. Yeah. Right? It's like no one ever fucking sat down and was like, here's how you be chivalrous. It's like, no. Just like fuck off. But Victorian people like to write about that. So that is like one of the things that influences us now. So that is kind of like the big Victoriana thing that sort of comes in. But I think that like, Geoffrey of Monmouth, you basically can't, you cannot understate his creation of the canon more broadly. And his sort of like introduction of the cast of characters. But I think that the things that we tend to know the most about as a society are kind of more directly wrapped up in like the Grail cycles, I would say.
Cool. Yeah. So for the rest of the episode, we are just going to talk through some characters, some settings and objects, and then some tropes from these from the Arthurian legend. Next time, we'll start talking about a few of the stories and go from there. But yeah, so Eleanor, I don't know that he needs a ton of introduction, but Arthur. What's I guess let's start with him. What's his deal? What's the story on King Arthur here?
It's your boy. It's King Arthur. Yeah, like it's an interesting one because I was like, well, how do I talk about Arthur, right? And it's like it's very difficult to talk about him on his own because he's sort of like a sum of the parts of all the other people around him. But basically, you need to understand that Arthur is like the supernatural king of ? Right? Like sometimes varying kingdoms with their own names, sometimes the English more generally, right? But he becomes sort of like the king of Britain. The legend has it, that he is kind of in a state of near death, but not exactly death, out on the Isle of Avalon, and he will come back to liberate, Britain in the hour of greatest need. Now, one might argue that would have been like when we were fighting the fucking Nazis or whatever, but like, hey ho. No. And so he is, the in many ways he just kind of encapsulate a spirit of Englishness or Britishness now. That's kind of like where he is at. But from a medieval perspective, yes, he does all that, but he's also kind of like a stand-in for the trials and tribulations of Christians more generally, and for the myriad ways that it is difficult to kind of do the right thing out in the world, even with the most best kind of like intentions or guidance, right? So he's kind of like an everyman sort of person if every man was a king.
He seems like a cipher. Like like he's a cipher for all of the other characters and things and settings around him, and he's also a cipher for the reader or the author's ideals and the reader to like place themselves in there and be like, oh, if I was a king, I would be like Art, I would be nice and good like Arthur, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like how like is Arthur, like, is he famous? I mean, because like you see, I mean, obviously there's a lot of, fighting and knighting and stuff to do. Is he known as like the greatest fighter of all of these people, or does he just happen to be the just king who's there?
He's a very good fighter, to be clear. I mean, this motherfucker fighting giants. All of these things.
To be clear, like there are like, as we've said, like 15 different versions of this canon, so if you're like, no, Arthur's the best fighter ever, cool. That's cool.
I mean, whatever.
Just say it, yeah.
Like, that's totally fine. But, he was a very, very good fighter, but also there are all these, like, complex legends about, like, his birth and things, but, the point is he kind of, like, comes from obscurity to be the king, as is foretold in legend, and he is a very good fighter, but the thing that he is very good at is ruling. More generally, and also hanging out with the boys.
Hey, man,
like
like every group of guys, they're just hanging out. They need somebody's got to grab, got to look around and be like, fuck, guys, we got to go get some more beers from the garage fridge. Otherwise, everybody's, people might miss the game. You don't want to have that, So you just gotta, you got to keep the beer. You got to keep the outdoor fridge stocked. You got to have chips and everything, and that's what Arthur does. He's bringing it all together.
Yeah, he's like, the guy who his house is always open. He's the one running the crib. He's really good at bringing new guys into the system, and like that's kind of his claim to fame, is that he runs a good party house.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, that's what's up. No one's saying he's not a good fighter, but he is kind of emphatically not the greatest fighters within, the canon, more generally. And we'll get to who he is. But it's not Arthur. But he is quite good. But he is also, famously quite Christian. That's kind of like the thing. So it's like, he'd be out fighting, the Saxons who are not Christian. Dun, dun, dun. And stuff like that, right? So, he fights the right people. He throws a good party. He knows he's very bros before hoes, and that's what they like,
He definitely, And then we got Merlin, who is, possibly a more malign influence here. What are we looking at with Merlin?
Yeah, so he's kind of like Geoffrey of Monmouth is the one who kind of like put him together. And he is a quite fun one because he is the son of kind of like a queen and a demon.
Nice.
Which we like, which is quite fun, which is why he is such a magic guy. And we dig that, right? So he kind of like grows up, becomes a very good and powerful magician, but he also kind of understands that there are things that are best for the country. So he decides to team up with Arthur, and basically he wants to make sure that things go well. And so he is also kind of like used, I think, a lot of the time to show about the possibilities of redemption, even when you have kind of, he's like a Hellboy character, right? Where it's like, is it nature? Is it nurture? What can one do if one is sufficiently moral?
Yeah.
Right. So, I think that Merlin is quite an interesting one for that. So, he has like powers of prophecy. He can do like varying forms of magic. He kind of gets into it with other characters within the Arthurian universe, but he is also kind of like the Obi-Wan for Arthur. If Arthur is Luke, then Merlin is Obi-Wan.
Nice.
There you go. I can do Star Wars references.
Hey, I like it. I like hearing it. It puts it on my level. No. So like, he kind of had he has dragons. I just got to ask about his cool dragons that are cool.
Oh yeah, he got dragons. And that's the cool shit to do. And that is kind of like proof of his powers. Right.
Yeah. He hides dragons underground, and they're gonna rise up and defend Wales at some point. Just you wait.
Woo. That's why there's a dragon on the Welsh flag for a reason, right?
Yep.
So like, your man there is out there kind of like controlling dragons, protecting things, basically doing cool shit.
Yeah.
More generally, right? Like pretty cool guy. Who does cool things. He's my fave.
Yeah.
Like in there because I like the magic shit.
Yeah.
Like that's what your girl's into.
He's fun. Yeah. I like that, at some point they were just kind of like, he built Stonehenge. It's cool.
Yeah.
Everybody loves Stonehenge. He built it. You're like,
and it's like he gets some
cool.
he gets some giants in.
Yeah.
To help him build Stonehenge, and I think that's cool. So he's all like, that's what I'm doing. Bow.
Yeah, I also like that, as Eleanor said, Geoffrey of Monmouth, he just created this character out of complete whole cloth from two other legends that didn't have anything to do with Arthur. He's just like, here you go. And now like he's inextricable from Arthur. He's just Merlin.
I got to tell you, Geoffrey of Monmouth, he really laid it all out on the floor when he came up with Merlin. Like, absolutely great stuff.
Everybody loves a wizard, man. People have been trying to get away from it for years. It's like, no, you need the old crotchety wizard to like, be the guide or the asshole or whatever. He just got to be there. Yeah. So then there's Guinevere.
Oh yeah, she the wife.
Does she have a role other than just being the wife, or other than just being the wife and occasionally stepping out on him with Lancelot?
I mean, not not really.
I do not believe King Arthur passes the Bechdel test.
No, it doesn't. Like, and there are other women who kind of like do interesting things, but it's like most of the women, are flawed, is what I would say. I mean, and granted, most of the characters are flawed. I will say that. It's not just the women. But the thing about Guinevere is it's like she's a great beauty. She's like the right kind of queen, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and she can simply not overcome her feminine nature to be incredibly horny and cuck your husband when hot French guys are around.
Who amongst us, really?
Yeah. it's very difficult. And basically her affair with Lancelot. I mean, when Geoffrey Monmouth wrote about her, he's like she had an affair with Mordred, which is worse. But eventually that gets changed into Lancelot, and that indirectly leads to kind of like the downfall of the kingdom, which we'll get into later. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like her major thing. So like Guinevere is a stand-in for ideas about what the average woman is. Mm-hmm. Right? She doesn't mean to be evil. She doesn't mean to kind of like give into lust. She is a Christian. She wants to do the right thing, but she just kind of can't help herself because of the circumstances of her marriage and her own like frailty as a woman. So she's just kind of like, again, sort of an every woman. If you know you're in a particularly misogynistic culture that blames women for the downfall of men, which is sexual in nature, right?
Yes. It was all Eve's fault.
Yeah.
Damn woman, from a bent rib or whatever. I don't remember. That's yeah.
You're bang on.
Yeah. And then you get Uther Pendragon, which is just an incredible name, if nothing else.
So strong. Bring back Uther as a name. Mm-hmm. Good name for a dog too. Uther. Mm-hmm. Yeah, name your cat Uther. Tell me about it, everybody. So Uther Pendragon is Arthur's dad. And fun fact, more cucking. Coming right up. So basically, Merlin at one point in time disguised Uther to look like Uther's enemy, the king Gorlois. And then he goes and fucks Lady Igraine, Gorlois' wife. And thereupon conceives Arthur. So, and everyone is like, haha, yes, cucking. Woo!
Great. Yeah, woo! All right, that's enough out of you, Uther. Go.
Yeah, basically. And so, and also, fun fact, Pendragon means head dragon in Brittonic. So that's fun. There you go.
Igraine was the head dragon. Oh God, Lancelot. Other than just having dick game on point. What?
Huge dick game. Mm-hmm. He like sleeps with a lot of women other than just Guinevere. But Lancelot, you gotta understand, is like the knight's knight. Yeah. The king, and he is considered to be the best knight for quite some time.
Yeah.
For quite some time. Basically, unrivaled swordsman. Jouster as fuck. He is the lord of a castle called Joyous Guard. Name alert. Nice. And he's Guinevere's personal champion, which ends up meaning that he has sex with her. And then thereabout, the Camelot falls, essentially. Yeah. So, he is kind of like, he comes into us from Cretin de Troyes, Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart. That's kind of like the big one, in which it's called the Knight of the Cart because he's willing to get in a cart and not ride a horse to prove his devotion to Guinevere. And everyone is like, hot damn, wow. Woo!
The original perfidious Frenchman.
Yeah,
how dare you, Lancelot,
can't believe it.
Son of a bitch.
Everyone, and also like hot as hell.
Oh yeah.
You know, is the guy she told you not to worry about. That's Lancelot.
Yeah. He's standing over there in the corner, smiles at your girl. She's done. It's over.
It's over.
You're headed to Cucktown. Get in the hotel cuck chair. Get out of here.
Get in it.
Oh man. Okay, Mordred. What's up with this son of a bitch?
Yeah. Okay. So Mordred, boo, bad
More
guy.
like Lestred. There we go. Sorry.
Yeah. So hilariously, Geoffrey of Monmouth said that Mordred is Arthur's nephew, and the son of King Lot initially, but from kind of like the 12th century onward, Mordred is considered to be Arthur's bastard son that he has with his half sister, who is the Queen of Orkney, who we'll talk about in a moment. Anyway, like, he's also the half-brother of Gawain, usually. And, you know, like, his main thing is that he becomes a Knight of the Round Table, and Arthur's like, yeah, come on in, brah. But he wants to kind of take over Camelot from Arthur, so he kind of pulls like Littlefinger Chaos as a ladder thing. Yeah. And he's the one who reveals Lancelot and Guinevere's affair.
Yeah.
Which then basically starts a civil war. He ends up fighting his dad and ends up stabbing his dad. And then his dad gets taken off to Avalon to, you know, come back at some point in time. So, like, he is a bad, very naughty bastard son. Yes.
Yeah. And then, is it Morgause? Is that?
Yeah, Morgause, I think.
Morgause, okay. Cool.
I think, maybe. So she's the Queen of Orkney. She is King Arthur's half-sister, but he don't know that. Okay, like, to be clear, like, it is some incest shit, but, like, they're not really sure. So that's kind of, like, what is happening. So basically, they're estranged. He didn't know she was his half-sister, you know, because he's got weird fucking...
Yeah.
You know, my dad was disguised as someone else.
Yeah.
Fruits. Anyway, they have sex. She gives birth to their bastard son. And yeah, that's kind of like, sometimes she's an antagonist. Mostly she's just kind of like, you know, a deus ex machina, basically. Like getting Mordred into the cycle.
Yeah.
So that this can happen. But she also has a lot of sex with a lot of different guys. So she's kind of like a lot of these women are kind of put out more specifically as like seductresses. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like she's really hot. She's quite predatory. She's always trying to fuck on everybody. Like, she wants to have sex with Lancelot. He's like, no. Mm-hmm. You know, like that. So she's, you know, a hussy, which is how you know she's bad. Or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Morgan Le Fay, the enchantress.
Yeah, she's a really interesting one because it really depends on who you ask what she is. And I mean, like, her name literally is just like Morgan the Fairy, you know?
Yeah.
And like, so Geoffrey of Monmouth has her come up in the Vita Merlini. And she's like, oh yeah, well, she's from Avalon, the Isle of Apples. And she's kind of just like one of like the 9 magical ladies who lives there. Mm-hmm. And she does all kinds of things. So it's like, sometimes she's just like a fairy or a magician or whatever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes she is more specifically a bad guy who is like messing with Merlin or messing with Arthur and wanting bad stuff to kind of like come around. So she is like she is related vaguely as well to Arthur, because since he's Uther Pendragon's son, that makes her his half brother. Like, so she's also the sister of the Queen of Orkney, right? Marries a guy called Urien, doesn't work out particularly well. They have a son, Yvain. She apprentices with Merlin. A cool chick. I really like her because I think that she's a really interesting one. Like, she's got a much more fleshed out kind of story. Yeah. And you can't really pin her down as any one thing. And so sometimes she really hates Arthur because she's like, you didn't treat our sister / the lady you fucked very well, so I'm going to, like, torment you. But one way or another, everyone agrees that she kind of takes him off to Avalon to look after him eventually. So I think that she's interesting because she's so varied. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at her, and I think that's neat.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we got Galahad.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so Galahad is very, very, very important. And he is Lancelot's bastard son with the Lady Elaine of Corbinic. And he is the best knight. There you go.
Just the best one.
He's the best one. And more specifically, he's known as a very good knight, but he's the purest knight. He's a big old virgin. He doesn't really know that Lancelot is his dad, shows up, has a fight with Lancelot, bests Lancelot. Lancelot is like, oh, word, let me bring you to Camelot. Check out this table. And Arthur is like, oh, you like this table? You think that maybe you could go find the Holy Grail? Sit in this chair. And the chair is like the Bene Gesserit box.
Oh, jeez.
In Dune. Where it's like, if it kills you if you are not able to actually kind of like attain the Holy Grail. But he's all like, yeah, nice chair you got here. Like, whatever, dude. Fucking
what? This is a cool chair. What's
nice chair?
What's,
like, what,
is something wrong? Am I supposed to feel something here?
Like, what's going on? And then everyone was like, oh shit, oh, this motherfucker sat in a chair and he didn't die. Oh, what? Woo! And then they know that he's gonna go find the Grail. Off he goes to find the Grail. Spoiler alert.
He does find it.
Does find the Grail. And then he basically is then granted kind of like a request by God. And he's like, yeah, I'd like to just choose the time of my death, which is a weird one. But like, okay. And then basically, like, he knows about it, kind of like goes back to court, has like a big divine revelation where he gets like so hard for angels that he's like, I'd like to die now, please. And then either, depending on who you ask, he either ascends bodily into heaven at that point in time, or like his spirit goes to heaven and his body is left behind. So like basically Joseph of Arimathea is like, sup homie, you like that shit? And it's like, whoa. So, you know, he represents Jesus, you know, the triumph over death.
Yeah.
What humanity can attain. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba. Right. So
yeah. Does he die a virgin?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's very important that you be a virgin. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently.
That I love it. I love it.
Gotta have that V card or you can't find the Grail, all right?
Oh man, what a fucking nerd. Mm-hmm. Just what a fucking nerd, man.
Yeah, it's like it's real nerd hours. What can I say? So
oh jeez. Man, I was gonna say something and I can't. Fuck, I forgot what it was.
Is it about how he's a big old virgin? Yes.
I don't yeah, probably. No, I was I think I was just, you know, I was going to make a he chose wisely joke from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yeah,
but
there
anyway,
you go.
Yeah, let's move on to something that isn't a terrible joke. Gawain.
Yeah, so this is King Arthur's bestie.
Yeah.
Like he's usually Margot's son with King Lot of Orkney, usually, but you know, this kind of like whatever. And so like his half brothers include Mordred. Right?
Yeah.
But like, you know, but sometimes he basically was like brought up at court in Rome, and then like comes back to Britain. You know, sometimes, you know, he knows where he's from, whatever. Very, very formidable, very, very courteous. Besties with Arthur. He's the maiden's knight, one for the ladies. Rescues a lot of women. Basically, he has some pretty good healing skills. You know, so he put that into his build.
I like it.
Yeah, and like he used to be kind of higher up until Lancelot comes along, and Lancelot usually kind of like usurps his place. And like, so sometimes like for example in like the Le Morte d'Arthur, he's kind of like almost villainous, which is interesting. So it's like basically until he's Lancelot until they come up with the concept of Lancelot, except that he never had sex with Guinevere.
I like it. He's just a character that was still floating around out there, and they were like, yeah, I guess he's here. Yeah. Yeah. And then we got Tristan. Who is Tristan?
Tristan is funny because Tristan basically gets written into the Round Table later because he's got his own epic story, Tristan and Isolde. And basically, that was such a barnstormer. Everybody liked Tristan and Isolde so much that like he gets kind of grandfathered in to, and he becomes a knight of the Round Table. So the Tristan and Isolde deal is that like he's supposed to go fetch. He's the nephew of the King of Cornwall, Mark. Just like kind of like
we got Galahad, we got Guinevere, we got Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, Mark, my buddy Mark.
So it's like Mark of Cornwall is his uncle. He gets engaged to an Irish princess, Isolde. He's supposed to go fetch her. They accidentally drink a love potion on the journey back to Cornwall.
Accidentally,
yeah, and then begin fucking. This eventually leads to Tristan's banishment and death. And everybody loves this one.
Yeah.
This is like, so this is a real, this is real courtly love. This does not follow the heroic journey at all. I love this one. It's very, very good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, I guess you mentioned it a little, but Isolde, I don't know.
So this is a really funny one because in the Tristan and Isolde, there's two of them. So you've got Isolde of Ireland, who's the princess that he's supposed to, that his uncle's supposed to marry. They fuck. It doesn't go well. Eventually they get broken up, right? And Tristan gets sent off to Brittany to like stay the fuck away from Isolde. He marries another woman, Isolde, also, but Isolde of Brittany. So basically, here he is, but he won't fuck Isolde of Brittany, even though she's really, really beautiful, and he won't have sex with her. So anyway, at a point in time, Tristan gets a poisoned wound while he's off knighting or whatever the hell, but Isolde Isolde of Ireland, is like this very, very famed physician, and he's like, please, can someone just like get her to come and save me? And she's like, yeah, I will come. And it's like, and he says, okay, if you're going to come, the boat I sent, when it comes back, have it have white sails. And if it comes back and you're not going to come, have them have black sails. Anyway, here's Isolde on the boat, like, going to come help her ex out or whatever. But his new Isolde is like jealous or whatever, and she's like, oh, Tristan, the ship's coming back, and he's like, what color are the sails? And she's like, black.
Oh.
And he immediately dies of grief, and then
well, that backfired on her, didn't it?
Yeah, I know, right? And then Irish Isolde gets there, feels like very, very sad, and then dies at his side. There you go. That's like one of the variants, although it's not in the prose Tristan. It's in like the later poetic ones. But I think that one's quite funny. I like it. So, there you go.
Yeah. We got Percival.
Percival. He shows up in the Cretin de Troyes story of Percival. It's not finished, his original one. He's one of the Knights of the Grail. So he's one of the ones that helps to actually find the Grail. Because he's also a big old virgin.
Yeah.
So like, but he's the one who meets the Fisher King.
Yeah.
Which will come up in a little bit. So he's like, he's one of the nerd ass nerds.
Yeah.
But there are some fun pictures of him that the pre-Raphaelites do. Arthur Hacker's got one of him, and he's like nerding out reading a book with a halo. There's a hottie on his lap, and he's like, not interested. Big old V card.
No. A woman, absolutely not. I want to hang out with all these men.
Yeah.
Just hang out and sweat. No
Dudes
reason
rock.
whatsoever.
Dudes rock. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then we've got a couple more here, and they're basic. These are, kind of plot devices, a lot of them, but we'll call them characters. The Green Knight.
Yeah, Green Knight. Green Knight, he is usually known as Bertolek, oftentimes. He gets transformed into the Green Knight by Morgan Le Fay to fuck with Gawain, who is her brother or whatever. Like, fine, whatever. It basically, the idea here is that like they're gonna like test the court and see what
Yeah.
happens. And also, he's like, hey, also, I'm going to send my wife to try to have sex with Gawain at the same time. Normal.
Yep.
You all saw the handy.
You know what happened, yeah.
Yeah. And, his skin's green, his clothes are greens. He's cool. We like him. Good man. Keep it up. Hilariously, Tolkien was like, I do not know what to tell you about this fucking guy. Like, Tolkien was like, dude, like, this is just like, there are no, it's very difficult to interpret him. So I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's just, not a bad guy. He was actually turned into this by someone else, yeah. Yep, and then we got the Questing Beast.
The Questing Beast is like my fave. So the Questing Beast maybe is based on medieval ideas of what a giraffe might be. Ooh. So it's got the head and neck of a snake, the body of a leopard, the haunches of a lion, and the feet of a hart.
Oh, fun.
And it's called the Questing Beast because it makes a sound like when a bunch of hunting dogs go after something. It sounds like a bunch of dogs questing. There, it kind of shows up to get people to go out and like chase. It's again like a Deus Ex Machina. It's a call to adventure. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. So it's like it appears to young King Arthur after he bangs his sister. And then King Pellinor is all like, "Hey, you seen that Questing Beast? Because I'm trying to kill it." And then you find out later that in some versions that the Questing Beast is the result of a deformed baby of a human woman who was in love with her brother, and then for some reason and then has sex with a devil, because the devil is all like, well, I'll make your brother love you. But then the devil's like, psych, you have to say that your brother raped you, normal stuff. And then their father decides to have her brother torn apart by dogs as punishment. And then her brother is all like, I'm going to curse the baby you're knocked up with by a devil, and he's going to make the same sound as the dogs that tear me apart. And it's like, basically, it's like a stand-in for evil stuff. Incest, violence. Yeah. And it also kind of shows you, it's like foreshadowing about what's going to bring down the kingdom. Yeah.
All right, and then we've got Tom Thumb. Okay. Tom Thumb, last one here.
Last guy. He is Arthur's court jester, no bigger than a thumb. His adventures include being eaten by several animals in a row. Yeah. Sometimes he gets in fights with giants. And King Arthur likes him very, very much. There's an alleged grave of his in Lincolnshire, in Tattershall.
Oh man, like they have that alleged grave for Dobby or whatever.
Yeah, right. It's like so. There. Yeah. It says that he died in 1620 at the age of 101. So, there you go.
That's awesome. Yeah. I was going to say, it reminds me of the Great Gazoo, from the Flintstones. Like he showed up to Fred Flintstone and no one else could see him. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, and it's very we're rebooting the series. Yeah. That's what's up.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we got a couple of settings here. And the first one is Arthur's Castle, which is different, but later just becomes Camelot, I guess.
Yeah. So Camelot is sort of it becomes the stand-in for the capital. It's first mentioned by Quechin de Troyes, and then later on becomes much more important. Geoffrey of Monmouth says that that's Arthur's primary base. Mm-hmm. It's on a river. It's next to a field. It's next to a forest. It's, a very big, pretty castle where you can find the round table. Yeah. Very importantly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've got Avalon, which we talked about a couple times.
Mm-hmm. It's the Isle of Apples, and funnily, some people were like, "Oh yeah, it used to be where Glastonbury Tor is, and there was a sea, and then it got filled in." I was in Glastonbury Tor at Solstice this year, vibing, nice. Huge vibes. Yeah. And so basically, so then people will say that Arthur's remains are under Glastonbury Tor. and things like that. But it's like the magic place where all of the magic ladies hang out.
Yeah.
And it's like if you something, think about it as like the West in Tolkien's things, right? Like I must go into the West. Like that's Avalon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sailing to the west to meet the elves on Avalon.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you got the round table where all the knights sit around and hang out and have goon sessions. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And as we said last time, depends on how big's this fucking table.
Yeah.
Is it for 12 people? Is it for 1,600 people? I don't fucking know. It's got that weird Bene Gesserit chair. But, you know, basically the idea is that it's like the round table is round because no one is better than anybody else, even though there's a literal fucking king here.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very important to people to kind of like say, you know, the idea is that if you have like sufficient courtliness, then you can be among equals and peers here at the round table. Yeah. So it kind of puts forward a myth of egalitarianism within a specific fucking system of hierarchy, which is quite funny. But yeah.
And then Excalibur, the magical sword. Everybody loves the magic sword.
So hilariously, Excalibur so Arthur's got two swords: the sword from the stone and the sword that is given to him by the Lady of the Lake. They're both called Excalibur. They're not the same sword. Question mark. But what Excalibur stands in for is like Arthur's right to rule.
Yeah.
Like the Excalibur means you definitely get to be king.
Yeah.
Keep it up. Great job.
Because you pulled it out of the sword and or were given it by the special lady.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's not a great way to run a kingdom, but there it is. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. And then finishing up here with a few tropes from the series. So obviously you just mentioned it, the sword and the stone. That's the implication that you are good enough to be king.
Yeah, it shows up in an anvil in a churchyard on Christmas Eve. No one can pull it out. The only person who can pull it out is someone who's going to be king. And Arthur's like, oh, what, this thing?
Yeah.
And like he pulls it out one time when no one's around, puts it back, and then Merlin is like, did you pull out the stone? And they're like, yeah, and then they do it again. And otherwise, the Lady of the Lake gives it to him. And then it like goes back into the lake also after he has been wounded and goes to Avalon. And she's like holding on to it.
Yep, and then we got the attempt to perfect society, but it is undone by the failure of humanity.
Indeed. That's what it's about, right? Because like the entire point of Camelot and the Round Table is like, oh, we're doing it, guys. We're gonna get together. We're gonna make an egalitarian society, but instead everybody fucks it up because everyone's having sex with everybody. Everyone's got a million bastard children. And so basically it is another way of talking about the fall of man more generally. It's just a retelling of the Garden of Eden story. It's like sex undoes everything, right? Yeah,
and then the search for the Grail. I guess that came in later, but yeah.
Yeah, it comes in later, and it's an interesting one because the Grail initially, it's kind of like, well, I don't know. It later becomes known as like the Holy Grail from the Last Supper, right? Like the goblet from the Last Supper. But sometimes it's like a plate. Sometimes it's a stone like the Philosopher's Stone, and it's got like healing powers. Sometimes, but basically, like everyone decides later on that it's like the Last Supper wine cup, and so you need to be pure of heart in order to obtain it, which is why it takes the nerd ass virgin knights to finally get to it. So yeah.
And then you get the Dolorous Stroke, which kills the fallen Fisher King, and you can pick up the Grail then finally.
Yeah, exactly. And the Fisher King, he had been injured before. So basically, he kind of like his dick don't work.
Yeah.
Which is sad. So he sits around fishing and guarding the Holy Grail until someone is going to like come and get hold of it. And so the Dolorous Stroke is it's basically the inciting incident for like everything that gets all of the Camelot things going.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we got, it came to mean this later, but as you've mentioned, chivalric romance, knightly duty, courtly love, etc.
Yeah, like everything that you bloody well expect, all the stuff that I'm constantly going on about.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like it does all kinds of things, Arthurian myth, right? It does, sometimes it's Tristan and Isolde and it's like, just what? Huh?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is just kind of like your generalized cucking story, and there's cucking stories all throughout. Like, like it starts with a cucking story. It's like, oh, Arthur's dad cucked his enemy. Hey, Merlin's mom got like cucked with a demon, like cucked a demon, like things that's just like cucking, because that's courtly love, baby. But then there's all the stuff about like what it is that a knight ought to be doing. So that it's supposed to be kind of like moral instruction for, hey, knights, the good thing that you could be doing with all of your power and money is like, I don't know, looking after women and, doing religious stuff and how about not fucking?
Yep.
How about that? Right.
They're like, no thanks. Not for me.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, it's like you kind of have like the two branches. You've got the Knights of the Grail who managed to do it, and everybody else who is too busy fucking.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So there's, and this I guess comes up a little bit in the aftermath, but the messianic return of Arthur from the Isle of Avalon.
Yeah, so it's like he then becomes like the protector of the nation. This is all the nationalistic stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's a protector. There he is under Glastonbury Tor or on the Isle of Avalon or whatever the fuck it is you want to say. And that is why he is the once and future king.
Yeah.
Right? So he is the king, and then he will be the king who will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. If you know your Catholic reference, no, like he won't judge the living and the dead. But obviously, it's kind of like the same thing as Jesus.
Yeah,
obviously,
he's coming back. He's going to hang out with someone who has ascended bodily into heaven. You get the whole thing. It'll be fun.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it'll be a treat for all involved. Yeah, and you mentioned it. We talked about it earlier, but there is the nascent nationalism that shows up in these things.
And it's like, for the Welsh, Arthur is a national hero. The English very much make a play of dominance to try to say that he is more specifically English, which makes him kind of British more generally. And this is the thing, is he's like a national protector, especially these stories about his return in the end. Which is very interesting because it does show you that people have ideas about themselves as groups in the medieval period. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And that's going to do it for this one. We we got a lot of stuff in there. I think next episode we have is it an interview next time, or is that the next?
Yeah,
week?
next time we're actually going to be having a friend of the show, the good girl. I was about to say doctor. For once, not a doctor, but my girl. And yours. You may know her from such shows as 10,000 Posts or Masters of Our Domain. But Phoebe K. Rosa will be joining us to talk about Tudor movies and TV shows and turning the messiest fucking family in all of British history into fiction. And that is going to be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then, after that, we'll be back to talk about some of these stories specifically. We'll go through a few of the more popular ones. Probably take a couple of episodes, maybe more. Who knows? But yeah, that's what we got going on with the Arthuriana. I hope you enjoyed it today. As we said, join the Patreon. We've got a new episode coming out on Friday about giants.
Woo!
Yeah, but other than that, Eleanor, what's going on with you?
Wrote a blog last week. You never know when your girl might write a blog about the 5G zombie virus and our propensity to say that medieval people are uniquely stupid, even though our ants are wilding out online. So you can go check that out at going-medieval.com. As per usual, you can check out my books, The Once and Future Sex, or indeed The Middle Ages, A Graphic Guide, available everywhere. Yeah, that's things. You can check me out on Twitter at Going Medieval. You can check me out on Blue Sky at Going Medieval. Cool. You can check me out on Instagram at Dr. Eleanor Yanaga, which is not very inventive, but I'm trying to post more there because it's my job or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. You know the deal with me. Luke is amazing on the apps. You can find the old show, People's History of the Old Republic, wherever you're listening to this. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.